I have the absolute honour and privilege of introducing our first keynote speaker, Dr. Liz Trant. Liz joins us from SOLAS, the Further Education and Training Authority, where she holds the position of Executive Director for Skills Development. And alongside the many things that Liz does, one of those is her interest is technology enhanced teaching and learning, as well as curriculum development, assessment and professional skills for employers. Liz has held many senior posts before, one in the HEA, where area was the head of skills for enterprise and engagement, and I know that this is going to be an engaging presentation because you're all going to be getting involved. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Liz Trant to open our keynote. Thank you.
We got sound. So good morning, everybody, and thanks so much to Gina and Paul and all of the organisers of this year's Edtech. This is actually my first time being at this conference, so I know quite a lot of people, but I suppose it's the first time I've been in this particular community of people who are working in and really passionate about and interested in digital technology and education and technology enhanced learning. And I know from talking to Gina and Paul and colleagues, it's a very vibrant community, very active, and I suppose I'm delighted to be here. I also, I suppose, I was really interested in seeing the theme of the conference, and I suppose again just working through and thinking about where we are in Ireland on technology enhanced learning, and I suppose I have. For a kind of an opener on what I want to talk to you about this morning was to pose a question, which is, are we at the end of the beginning in technology enhanced learning? And to me, that was where this theme of this conference, this 19th year, really fits in, where in a way, I believe, and we'll talk through it over the coming 20-30 minutes or so, I believe we are at a milestone point where we've done a lot, we've tried a lot, we know a lot, and now we're at the point of really embedding high quality, really effective technology in learning, which really enhances and personalises the learning experience for all of our students, and really, I suppose, improves those outcomes. So what I'm going to do, and what I'd like to do, is just to talk maybe for about 30-35 minutes or so, and then, as Gina was saying, I want to do a little bit of interactive work, and I'm going to use Mentimeter at the end just to gather maybe a little bit of evidence and input from yourselves as part of the conference. But maybe just to talk a little bit, I suppose, about, and Gina mentioned my background, and what's happening in further education and training in particular. So some of you may be aware, and I know I have colleagues here from further education and training who've actually, many of them have helped, supported me in just preparing for this morning. But we're at a really exciting time in the whole sector. As you know, there was a big change happened 5 years ago now, where education and training boards were created all around the country out of former VECs and FOSS training centres, and SOLAS was also set up as the Further Education and Training Authority. And this slide just gives, I suppose, a bit of a flavour of what's been happening over the last 5 years. So and starting there, this, the whole area of establishment, how we kind of, a strategy, similar to, I suppose, what's been happening in where there's big transformation happening within the education system, key elements like data and so on, enabling strategies, apprenticeship and traineeship, a huge focus. And as you know, apprenticeship is one of those learning style or learning provision that spans both further and higher education, and really exciting things happening in that area. Some of you will be familiar with the expansion of apprenticeships that's underway at the moment, and 2 years ago the first very almost purely online apprenticeship was introduced with insurance practice, which leads to a level 8 honours degree. So I suppose an example of how technology is very much embedded in a type of provision that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And now we're at the point where there's a process of strategic dialogue happening in further education and training. So there's a whole backdrop of transformation and innovation happening, and technology enhanced learning very much fitting into that. And what I'd like to talk this morning is I suppose very much to have a flavour of what's happening in further education and training, but also to take that scan into primary and second level in Ireland, and also higher education, and to take a look at how we're doing, where we're at across the scene, and I suppose where then that whole challenge about quality fits in and how we move forward. And I suppose that point, why conclude that we're at the end of the beginning? So just, I suppose, taking a scan of where Ireland fits and within Europe and internationally. So we all know this. I mean, there's now a really extensive evidence base on technology enhanced learning. I mean, I'm not an expert in this area. I'm coming from the policy angle, but just taking a look at the kind of the sheer range of research, of meta-analysis that's been done, beyond no significant difference, the New Horizons, all of that work, which is really, I suppose, brought the whole area of technology enhanced learning to I suppose a level of maturity and knowledge about what is working. Is pure online ever going to work? Is it actually more about blended learning? What is actually really personalising learning for people? How can assessment be transformed so that people can have really good quality experiences when they come to that point in their learning? High profile strategies and investments. So again, we know, and it's right across the system here as well, where there is real commitment, visible, high profile commitment to the whole area of technology and education, and that sense that this is not experimentation anymore. We actually all need to embrace this and figure out how this becomes consistent and embedded right across our organisations and then our system as a whole. The enterprise voice. Again, we all know, and I don't know, there may be some enterprise representatives here this morning, but I suppose the general comment or view is probably that in education we tend to be a little bit behind sometimes what happens in enterprise. I was at an American Chamber of Commerce conference last year on this whole area of technology as part of training in employment. And I mean, you know, the way in which it's embedded, how they're actually, you know, companies are using technology to upskill, continuously develop their people is, you know, I suppose was a real eye opener for me. And, you know, we're aware of that, and we're also getting those messages from enterprise about what they want and what they're looking for from our graduates as well. So I suppose a really strong influence there. And then obviously there's the whole area of digital competency frameworks, and there are many of them. You're all very familiar and use them, I'm sure, in your day-to-day practice, and have been really useful, I suppose, as we're charting our development and how we're actually moving forward. I also just reference not all, but some of the European initiatives and activities that are underway. And I was really struck in taking kind of a look at the most recent material. I mean, the messages coming from documents like the Digital Agenda for Europe 2020, like the New Skills Agenda, like the Digital Single Market Strategy is, from a European perspective, there's that sense that, you know, as Europeans, we all need to be moving ahead on this, and each country then within that constellation. So that sense that if we don't do this, we're going to get left behind. Sometimes remind me of the Sputnik conference, conversations that were probably happening back in the 20th century. But just that sense that this is a real important move forward that we need to do in Europe. And obviously skills, knowledge, learning is a key part of that. The Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition, also with, you know, the whole area of the digital agenda very much at the heart of it, and upskilling pathways, which was very much about how we make sure that our lower skilled workers in employment, as well as people who are trying to enter the jobs market and who maybe have few or no qualifications, can get that opportunity and access to technology and access to that ability to use it. Just to be probably familiar, I think it's this year is the third year. The European Digital Skills Awards were introduced as a kind of part of that showcasing within Europe of what's happening. And last year, Ireland were finalists in there's 5 categories. One of them is education. And last year, Ireland were finalists in the education category for Digital Schools of Distinction, which you're probably familiar with or know of. It's the within primary and secondary schools is an initiative in Ireland to actually embed and promote digital technologies. So that's I think there was a Polish entry that actually won, but we were in the final, and there's another some of you may be involved this year in entering for the Digital Skills Awards. So again, I suppose as part of that push and that profile and that drive by Europe again into that whole area of like, this is not experimentation anymore. This is a real serious objective that we all have to work towards. You probably all have seen, and I just thought to first reflect on the positive, the DESI index, which is among Europe, how we're doing on the digital economy and society, that ranking, and overall we're doing well. We're 6th there, and across all those headings, we relative to other European countries, we're doing pretty well. However, we also, on the human capital side, there's I suppose a story to be told, which is that when we look at least those groups that have at least basic digital skills, we actually are behind. We're significantly behind. We're 23rd. We've gone up 1 place from last year, but we're still lagging well behind. And yet, on the STEM graduates, we're actually first. So there's a real issue there, I suppose, about what's happening in Ireland, how we're doing, and I suppose areas where we need to really work on. And I suppose that goes to the heart of, there's lots of reasons behind that, to do with infrastructure, to do with access to broadband and so on. But I think from an education perspective, it's something, and certainly in further education and training, that we're really focused on, because a lot of the learners in further education and training they're older learners, they're people who are trying to upskill and reskill. And so it's a really important dimension, I suppose, of how within further education and training things need to develop. Here's the 4 main strategies directing what we do, and how all of this is moving forward in Ireland. So the one there, the second one from the left, is the Doing More with Digital, which came out in 2013, and there's a new digital strategy for Ireland in development at the moment. The digital strategy for schools. Then there's the further education and training strategy, and then the higher education strategy, which Patricia mentioned, and that was to 2017. There's a lot of work underway on that, with another roadmap piece of work coming. But I suppose what this shows is, there's a lot happening within each part of the system, I spoke to an inspector in the department, as kind of in leading up to this conference. I spoke to civil servants in the Department of Education and Skills. I spoke to colleagues in further education and training, a range, including Fionnuala Anderson and Brendan Ryan, Tom Taylor, who are here today. Just in terms of all of the detail of what's happening within the parts of the system, and then linked in with the Higher Education Authority and the Teaching Forum on the digital roadmap. So it's clear that there's, I suppose there's a lot underway, and what was also interesting was and I suppose part of you'll be more aware of this in the room. I suppose it's the extent to which we're all aware of what else is happening in the system. I certainly wasn't as aware of the extent of what's happening, say, in primary level and second level at this stage. So I think there's a bit there about, and I'll talk a little bit about it later, about how we join up all of this in Ireland and how that's going to move the dial. So I suppose, again, turning back to the whole issue of quality and embedding quality, what was emerging for me was that there are 3 strong trends identifiable across the system. The first one, and the one I'll focus on, and the strongest one probably, is the people element. That we now know, I would argue, that it's through developing, supporting, building confidence in our teachers, in our senior leaders, that is how we will really embed quality in the system. The second one then is on the policy, embedding technology and digital learning as part of formal policy and driving that. And the third one is how we all work together. And what I'd like to do is just to spend a little bit of time on each of those, and I suppose what I was seeing and what was emerging across the system. The first one, I suppose, is that point, that teachers, and I use teachers in a broad sense, that's including instructors, tutors, lecturers, I use, it's a generic term, that initial teacher education and then continuous professional development are investing in those, getting really good at those elements of preparing and then supporting our teachers is really, is part of how we will really embed this and get a really high quality digital education approach in Ireland. And then the second thing is our leaders, to bring our leaders along with us and how we do that. And I'm mentioning there principals, presidents, registrars are in there too, chief executives of ETBs, for example, and their senior teams. So that there's, while teachers are developed, that the whole system then moves along with it. Looking across the system, and I've just a couple of examples here, and that's I've used any images I've used are kind of real ones. So this is from a kind of a major professional development conference that happened in Dublin and O'Leary ETB last year. So there's a huge amount of this going on around the system. So in service, or at primary and second level is happening. Initial teacher education as well, and there's an action plan. The first action plan came out last year for the digital strategy for schools, and there's another one coming out shortly. And there's a really strong commitment there to, I suppose, first of all, to get technology enhanced learning embedded in initial teacher education, and then also opportunities which are really, I suppose, I looked at the Professional Service for Development of Teachers website, which supports primary and second level teachers. Huge demand for in-service in the summer and at other periods in the year in the whole area of technology enhanced learning. So there's a huge investment going on there. A very wide range of CPD happening in further and higher education, and again there was reference to some of that this earlier in the opening comments this morning, but I mean there's constantly, I suppose, a lot of work underway to prepare and support people as we move along. Practice frameworks and CPD development is happening in further education training. So, and just to speak a bit about that, as part of the further education and training strategy, there is a commitment to have a formal professional development structure within further education and training, and there's two pieces of work underway to develop both introductory and then advanced skills among teachers in delivering and using technology enhanced learning. This October, those two initiatives will be rolled out, and the idea is that along with all of the other CPD that's happening, that will really embed technology enhanced learning within the system, and then a range of leadership initiatives as well. So and I suppose that's where in the primary and second level there's active work with principals and deputy principals, similarly in further education and training, and we know from the work that the Teaching Forum is doing, they've done significant work with leaders and looking at how that gets embedded and how it's driven and led by leaders in the system also. Here's just some examples again, just to zoom into further education and training, and this is from Limerick and Clare Education and Training Board. So just, I suppose there's just a few examples of what's happening in that particular ETB, of the actual delivery that's going on, iBeacons, using GoPros, augmented reality training, and underpinned by a very structured, formal professional development policy with digital badges then supporting that and recognising that. And again, I know digital badges are big in higher education as well, as a way of recognising that ongoing both formal and informal learning. And that's just a snapshot, I suppose, of part of some of the things that are happening in education and training boards. The second area just there is on the policy infrastructure. So, and that idea of that this again is part of that coming of age that we're at, which is where technology enhanced learning becomes a formal part of the policy. And so, just to give an example, I suppose, of what's happening now in primary and second level, in September. There are planning guidelines for digital technology and learning which are going to become part of the whole school planning framework. So this is not an optional thing in primary and second level from September. Right across the board, there will be a requirement to build and show evidence of where technology enhanced learning is embedded within the primary and second level school system. And that's a very deliberate policy by the Department of Education and Skills to make this happen. We know that in further and higher education there's a similar embedding approach going on. So there's part of what's happening in further education and training, the annual planning and funding process. There's a section and a requirement there to talk about to set out what the plans are and then look for funding to support it. There are new strategic performance agreements, which I mentioned earlier, which have a formal element of what each ETB agrees to do, which deals with and covers technology enhanced learning, and an action plan within each education and training board to deliver that. And then in higher education, as some of you will be aware, there's the new 2018 to 2020 strategic performance framework targets, and again technology enhanced learning and digital technologies are a formal part of that and are linked to funding. So I suppose again in Ireland, only in the last year, 2 years, I suppose there has been that approach where this is a formal, explicit part of how we do our work, how our organisations are funded, and the direction we're going in. I just have a short clip to show you of just what's been rolled out this is in Dublin and Dunleary ETB, a clip which has been used to explain and I suppose deliver that message to principals and deputy principals about what's needed and what's coming down the tracks across that particular ETB. Fionnuala Anderson, who's the Director of Further Education Training, is here, and I suppose we'll talk to people a bit more about how that was used as a kind of, I suppose, a piece to get that message across, right across an ETB, which is primary schools, second level schools, further education and training institutions as well, a big reach of just in that particular ETB, how I suppose that process of embedding that new agenda is happening and is being achieved. The third area on the quality spectrum, which was emerging for me, was in collaboration. And again, and I suppose I mentioned it earlier, I think collectively we have work to do, all of us, in how we reach across the system, how we reach across primary, second level, further and higher, and share what we're doing. I think opportunities like today and this conference and ILTA are fantastic, but again, it's about how we actually do more of that and share more of that. When I was, I suppose, in the last few weeks, it really struck me, and I'm not an exception in this. I suppose I had a broad view of what was happening in primary, second level, but I didn't have any kind of a detail. I was hugely impressed by what's actually going on in that system. It's not fully embedded. It's still a journey in that sector as well. But I think there is a real advantage and an opportunity in us having that overview and looking at how we can reach across the system. And part of the rationale for that, is that better? Part of the rationale for that is that when we have learners going through our system now, starting in primary school, so those very small babies will shortly go into primary and on into second level, further and higher, it's really important that there's that consistency of support and of service and of learning that's happening. As we talk more and we give much more meaning now to what lifelong learning is, that we actually know what it's about, that opportunity for people to pick up as they go, to go into work, to come out of work, to do upskilling in employment right throughout their lives. It's that spotlight comes on our education system to have that consistency and that coherence right throughout. So I think as we move into this space where we're becoming much more structured, and in a way technology and enhanced learning is becoming part of the mainstream, I think I would argue it's a really important part of how we move forward. There are some really good examples, and just the image there on the right, you'll be familiar with it. It's from the higher education digital strategy, and a lot of active work going on it. You'll see there the second recommendation is on collaboration, and that's very much collaboration within the system in the first instance, which is really important. And we know there's a lot of it's happening within further education and training, within primary, and I've just singled out some of the things. There was a high-profile schools clusters initiative got underway and invited groups of schools to come together and make proposals, primary and second level, and make proposals on how they would actually work together on particular technology initiatives. I spoke to the inspector who was involved in assessing it. They had a huge response, and they've now come up with 40 projects that they're going to fund, really innovative projects, spanning all the way from music to STEM subjects, including engineering and science, to using, enhancing English and maths and so on. And that's actually just getting underway now over the coming months and is going to be really interesting. But that's, I suppose, a way in which, in that part of the system, they're driving collaboration within primary level and within second level. There's a range of steering groups and active working groups and communities of practice within further education and training that are very active and sharing work, and platforms, like Moodle and so on, and shared learning content is really driving that also. And then there's the Teaching Forum and all of the work that the Teaching and Learning Forum has done in higher education with all of those initiatives, the awards systems, the opportunities for people to meet, the research and so on. So there's been a lot, I think, happening within. And perhaps, I think, maybe there's that bit about how we then look across and how we connect up. And the research now is increasingly starting to spread and span across boundaries. So looking at that meta look at systems and how we're doing and how we're connecting up. So just, I suppose, where does all this... Is there a focus where all this going, and taking that step back and sort of saying, okay, well, how are we doing, and how does this fit into the bigger picture of where our education system is going? And again, you'll be familiar. This is a goal that the current Minister for Education and Skills has set out, that by 2026 we will be the best education system in Europe. And there are a number of metrics that can and will be used to actually gauge that, and then the question is, well, what will this look like? If we're looking at this from the technology enhanced learning angle, what will it look like, and how will we be? And so what I've done here is, I suppose, is based on the kind of the analysis I was doing, I suppose, putting out 3 possible statements or indicators of what we might be like in 2026 if we've achieved this from the technology enhanced learning angle. So the first one, back to the people bit. Confident teachers, expert teachers, really using technology to enhance learning. I mean, we all know, and you're all very familiar with, and you know them in your own organisations as well, where technology hasn't worked, and the steps taken have faltered or stopped, but we now have a much better sense emerging of what really makes a difference and how technology can really genuinely enhance learning, personalise learning for people, really, I suppose, assist people who otherwise are struggling with I suppose, cracking that whatever particular challenge they have in making progress in what they're studying or what they're learning. The second one then is, technology enhanced learning is that bit about embedding within the structures at the heart of our school and college policies and strategies. So a look in 2026 is sort of saying, where does this fit? It's very explicit, it's very it's driven by the overall approaches, by funding and so on. It's not somewhere where it still is in some places. It's not out there somewhere, still somewhat on the margins. And the last, I suppose, that evidence base that we're able to actually talk about and show the impact on learner outcomes. Where people actually have genuinely been able to improve, they've actually achieved better, they've had a better experience because of the impact and the contribution of technology. And just adding in, again, I was seeing it again in some of the literature, that whole element of fun in learning, where technology that we all know can just be so, have such an impact, where, that whole really core element that we all know about and we're trying to enhance and develop in all our students and learners, which is, this is actually exciting what we're doing. This learning business is, I can do it and I'm enjoying it and I'm having fun doing it. And just that potential of technology to really bring that along. So you may not agree with that, or and that's, I suppose, just presenting it as one option or as one scenario, to sort of that's maybe what this might look like in 2026 when we're looking back. And speaking of looking back, this was a phrase, I think is it one of these things that is the latest buzzword, or maybe it's been around for a while and I've just come across it, but that idea of backcasting, which is, rather than forecasting, backcasting is where you know where you want to get to, and then you're sort of saying, okay, step back along the way, how are we going to get there? So, and I suppose that's a question for us, given where we are right now. We're in 2018, we've 8 years to 2026. How are we actually going to, how are we going to take where we are right now and get to that point? Whatever it is, there's one possibility there, but whatever it is. So I'm going to stop now, because what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask you all to do a little bit of talking and a bit of work and a bit of feedback. Before I do that, because I'm going to give you a question and ask you to maybe in pairs to have a bit of a chat before you feedback on use Mentimeter for that. But just, is there any comments or questions or reactions or anything anybody wants to say just on what you've heard? Yep.
I really like the tone of the keynote, and it's doing exactly what we wanted to do in terms of having this more, I suppose, integrated approach with technology enhanced learning across all of the sectors. And I think the challenge will be to join the dots and to seamlessly, for students to seamlessly kind of go from one phase to another, and to be able to kind of bring their knowledge and their dispositions through that, but also the work that they do in particular institutional areas, that they can bring those things with them as well, so that you have systems that it's a truly lifelong learning experience that our learners are going through. But it's just really great to see the way that you visualized it in a kind of an integrated way. So it gives us a lot of food for thought. Thanks very much.
Yep. Sorry, make Gina run. Sorry, Gina.
Thanks very much. In order to get where we want to be in 2026, as you've just outlined, what would you identify as the biggest challenge, as the biggest hurdle we've to overcome?
I think it's about, to me, we're not embedded enough yet. So there are lots, and there's growing numbers of champions, of people who are passionate about technology enhanced learning. And this is right across the system. I'm very familiar with further education training, higher education from my previous experience. But I think there are still, it's still very easy